In my life, I have a passion about sharks, and we've shared that before in other episodes of tracking. And in studying sharks, specifically shark attacks, that seems like what more people are interested in than anything else about sharks is the attacks that take place. I remember years ago studying about the USS Indianapolis. That's what I want to talk to you about this morning. The USS Indianapolis had sort of a little bit of its story told in the movie Jaws. If you watch that, the captain of the boat was talking to Chief Brody and them about it. The USS Indianapolis was the flagship of the Fifth Fleet, sailing proud through the South Pacific on duty during World War II. As a matter of fact, it had just delivered its parts for an atomic bomb that would be dropped in Japan. It had just delivered basically the bomb in its pieces to be assembled. And after it had dropped it off, it was about July the 30th, 1945. A Japanese submarine, I-58, had targeted the Indianapolis and shot it somewhere. It's out in the Philippine Sea. National Geographic and others back in about 2001, 2005 have gone out there and tried to find the wrecks and the wreckage and remain of the USS Indianapolis, and they haven't found it yet. They found some debris but can't prove that it came from the Indianapolis. And it sank in 12 minutes and became probably the greatest catastrophe of vessel sinkings in the history of the U.S. Navy. And in 12 minutes, the 1,196 men that were on the ship on board went down, and you had probably 900 actually get in the water as a boat was going down that lived beyond the explosions and all. Probably had around 900 men that were alive. But of the 900 men that went down, only 317 survived. 2/3 of those, 2 out of every 3 men that went in the water never came out of it. And for 4 days, they floated around in there. You had life preservers, debris, life jackets, rafts, everything out there. And men literally hanging on to a piece of floating something and just treading water. And with the exposure of the elements, the heat, the salt water, nothing to drink, nothing to eat, it would be hard anyway. But then came the sharks, and probably the one that is given the most reputation for the damage was the oceanic whitetip. But there were different reports that said that sharks were so prevalent in the waters that literally you could have walked on their backs because there were just dorsal fins everywhere. The screams, the chaos. You've seen Jaws where they pull men underwater, and that's what would take place. They'd grab a man as they come by, drag him underwater and down a ways. You had probably pieces of the bodies floating around from all that was done. For 4 days, a reconnaissance plane came and found men floating in the water, and by the time they'd gotten the men out of the water, 1,196 in the boat, 900 went in the water, only 317 came out. It's a very hard, devastating accident that took place, and like I said, one of the worst in naval history. What I wanted to look at today was in those 4 days that those men had to be there in that water and suffer and watch their fellow men die, and the soldiers that they served with and lived with and worked with, and all the destruction and the hopelessness. Because, I mean, in 4 days you begin to think nobody's coming to get us. Does nobody know where we're at? Is anybody out there? Even the Titanic had people within an hour away that could be there to help get survivors out of the frozen water. But what about us? And you can imagine for 4 days the suffering that was taking place in their minds, and the hurt and the pain that they were going through, and the wondering, maybe even where's God? Paul, in his sufferings, when Paul was living for God, Paul went through one suffering after another after another. After he became established as an apostle, as he began living for God and going around teaching people about God, Paul suffered. Sometimes we think the Christ life as an easy life, and I'll tell you it's not. You have an enemy, and his name is Satan, and he has those that will do his bidding for him. You have people that'll make your life a suffering moment because you're trying to live for God. But that doesn't mean you quit living for God, just as it means if you're out there in the shark-infested waters, you just give up and quit living. You don't do that. You keep living. And in the Christ life, you keep living for God. Paul had a strange way of thinking. He wrote in 2 Corinthians as he was going through things, and he said there was a thing that affected him. Some scholars believe it was a sickness that was taking place in his eyes, because another place said that he said, when I was among you, sick among you, you would have even pulled out your very eyes for me. So it's the thought was something was wrong with his vision. And as Paul was suffering, he wrote this statement, and he said, concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it would depart from me. 3 times I prayed, and I imagine these guys in the water for 4 days prayed a lot more than just 3 times. God, get me out of this. God, save me. God, help me. God, heal me. Paul prayed this, and he said 3 times, God said, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. That almost makes it sound like God likes inflicting punishment on us, and that's not it. What God does is He uses the sufferings to make us strong. He allows us to go through sufferings, and most of the sufferings we go through are of our own creation. It's our own demise. It's things that we open the door for. But when we go through a suffering, God allows it to take place specifically so that we get us out of the way so that God can be God. And Paul says, therefore, I will gladly rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities. This is crazy. I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake. Here's Paul saying, man, if that's the case, if you're made perfect through my weakness, then God, I'm going to say yay, and I'm excited about all the hard times. I'm on the USS Indianapolis of my life. My ship has gone down, and I've got the sharks of life trying to eat me and drag me down. I'm kicking and screaming and trying to stay alive. Yet in this moment, I will rejoice. And that sounds absolutely stupid until you realize why Paul is saying this. Because he ends that with saying, for when I am weak, then I'm strong. When I'm going through my persecutions, when I'm going through my hard times, when I'm going through my being marooned in the ocean in shark-infested waters, and that's about what life is like some days, I can say thank you, God. Because when I'm at my moment of weakness is when God is able to be seen as strong. When I'm in my moment of weakness, I will be strong. Because now it's not Mike Sullivan trying to keep Mike Sullivan strong. It's not you trying to keep you strong. It's you allowing God to make you strong. So I want to encourage you in this week as you're living, as you're going about, and you may be swimming through some shark-infested waters. You may feel like, man, I am going through it. Do as Paul did. Do that crazy thing that doesn't make sense. Rejoice in it. Knowing that this is just a season. This will pass. You have survived 100% of every catastrophic event in your life that you've ever faced. You've overcome them 100%. You've lived through them. So you'll know, I'm going to live through this. But as I go through this, I'm going to become stronger because I'm going to allow God to be my strength. And people will see my strength. And they're going to see that my God is taking care of me. He's watching over me. And I will be one of those that will come out of this water. I will come out of this alive because I want to keep living. And I'm going to keep believing that God is making me strong. God bless you. I love you. I pray that you have a great week living your Christ life this week.